Excuse me, you're in my seat, and frankly, you look like you crawled out of coach to play dress up.
The words sliced through the first-class cabin of Elite Airways Flight 891 like a blade through silk. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. Every phone slowly lifted. The woman standing in the aisle designer dress, straining against her curves, jewelry catching the cabin lights, stared down at the man in seat 3A with the kind of disgust usually reserved for something stuck to her shoe. The man she was addressing didn't flinch. Terrence Montgomery. 42 years old, dark skin, gentle eyes looked up from his tablet where his 8-year-old daughter Emma's hand-drawn airplane was displayed. Her science fair project. The reason he was on this flight. The reason he'd bought the most expensive seat on the plane just to have space to work and think about surprising her in Los Angeles. Ma'am, Terrence said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of calm that comes from years of handling board meetings and hostile takeovers. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. This is seat 3A. I have my boarding pass right here. He held up the boarding pass, first class, clearly printed Elite Airways logo gleaming. The woman who'd introduced herself loudly to other passengers as Candace Whitmore didn't even glance at it. "Oh, please." Candace snorted, her voice rising to ensure everyone in the cabin could hear. "Do you honestly think I'm going to fall for some fake boarding pass security?" She turned toward the front of the plane, waving her manicured fingers. "There's someone in first class who clearly doesn't belong here." The cabin air grew thick. Passengers craned their necks. A college-aged kid in 2B pulled out his phone finger, hovering over the record button. A woman in scrubs, sitting in 4A, shifted uncomfortably, recognizing injustice but unsure how to respond. Terrence looked down at his tablet again. Emma's smiling face stared back at him from their last video call. "Daddy, my volcano is going to be the best one at the science fair. Are you really going to surprise me?" Her voice echoed in his memory, innocent and trusting. He was supposed to land at 5:30 p.m. Pacific time. The science fair started at 6:00 p.m. He'd planned every minute to make sure he could see her face light up when he walked into that gymnasium. Security Candace called again, her voice now echoing through the cabin. "I need someone to remove this man immediately." Terrence's fingers tightened slightly around his boarding pass. In his leather jacket pocket, his phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Daddy." "I'm so excited. Mrs. Peterson says parents are starting to arrive. I keep looking for you," he typed back quickly. "Daddy's running just a little late, sweetheart. Save me a front row seat to see your volcano explode." "Sir." A flight attendant appeared at his elbow. Jessica Rivera, 28. Hispanic, with worried eyes and a nervous smile. "I'm sorry to bother you, but there seems to be some confusion about your seat assignment." Terrence looked up at her, then at Candace, who stood with arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently. Around them, the cabin had gone from normal pre-flight chatter to dead silence. Everyone was watching. Everyone was recording. Everyone was making judgments. "No confusion on my end," Terrence said, gently handing Jessica his boarding pass. "Seat 3A, purchased 3 weeks ago." Jessica scanned the pass with her device, her brow furrowed. "Sir, this shows valid, but—" She glanced nervously at Candace. But what Candace interjected, stepping closer. "Let me guess it's one of those upgrade scams. People like him buy cheap tickets and then sweet-talk gate agents into free upgrades. Or maybe he paid someone to hack the system. I've seen it before." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Terrence felt every eye in first class studying him. His dark jeans, his plain gray t-shirt under the worn leather jacket, his simple sneakers. To them, he probably looked like someone who'd won a contest or gotten lucky. Not someone who belonged in a seat that cost more than most people made in a week. Not someone who owned 73% of the airline they were sitting in. But Emma didn't know any of that. Emma just knew her daddy promised to be there, and Daddy always kept his promises. Ma'am Terrence said to Candace, his voice still steady, "I paid for this seat legally. I'm here to travel, not to cause problems." Candace laughed, a sharp sound that made other passengers wince. "Oh, I'm sure you are. Let me guess you're going to pull the race card now, Claim. I'm discriminating against you because I'm asking reasonable questions." The words hit the cabin like a physical blow. The college kid in 2B hit record. The nurse in 4A sucked in a breath. An older businessman in 1A shook his head and looked out the window, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to get involved. "No, ma'am," Terrence said quietly. "I'm just going to sit in the seat I purchased and mind my own business." "Your business?" Candace's voice rose another octave. "Your business is disrupting this entire cabin. Do you see how uncomfortable you've made everyone? Look around. People are staring because they know something's not right here." She gestured broadly at the other passengers, many of whom quickly looked away, ashamed to be caught watching but unable to stop. "People like you, Candace," continued her voice dripping with disdain, "always think rules don't apply to you. You think you can just walk into spaces that were never meant for you and expect everyone to just accept it. Well, not on my watch." Terrence closed his eyes for a moment. In his mind, he heard his mother's voice from 25 years ago. "Son, the Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Exodus 14:14. She'd whispered those words to him the night before his first day at Stanford when he was 17 and scared and sure he didn't belong among all those wealthy kids with their perfect clothes and perfect lives. Now here he was, 42 years old, worth more money than most of those Stanford kids could ever dream of, and still being told he didn't belong. The irony wasn't lost on him. It just wasn't funny. Candace Whitmore hadn't planned to cause a scene when she boarded Elite Airways Flight 891. She'd planned to work on her presentation for Monday's client meeting, maybe catch up on emails, and definitely enjoy the complimentary champagne that came with her first-class upgrade. But the moment she saw him sitting in what should have been her row, something inside her shifted from inconvenience to outrage. It wasn't just that he was in first class. It was how comfortable he looked, how he belonged there in his mind, even though everything about him screamed economy passenger. The clothes, the casual posture, the way he was looking at some child's drawing on his tablet instead of working on a laptop like a real business traveler. Candace knew business travelers. She was one of them. VP of Marketing at Whitmore & Associates, 15 years climbing the corporate ladder, fighting for respect in every boardroom she entered. She'd earned her first-class seats through brutal hours, client dinners that lasted until midnight, and presentations that made or broke million-dollar contracts. And recently she'd been losing those contracts. 3 major deals in the past 6 months, all to the same competitor, Montgomery Digital Services, a tech company that somehow kept underbidding them and delivering better results. It was humiliating. It was personal. And it was probably because they were playing some kind of diversity card with clients getting favorable treatment for reasons that had nothing to do with merit. Security, she called again, louder this time. "I need someone up here immediately." Jessica Rivera, the flight attendant, was still studying Terrence's boarding pass, her scanning device beeping softly. "Ma'am, his ticket appears to be valid." "I'm not sure what the issue is." "The issue," Candace said, stepping closer to Jessica and lowering her voice to a stage whisper that everyone could still hear, "is that I've been flying this route for 5 years. I know the regular first-class passengers. I know who belongs here, and this man is not one of them." She pointed at Terrence, who was now texting someone, probably trying to coordinate whatever scam he was running. "Look at his clothes. Look at how nervous he is. Does he look like someone who can afford a $3,000 ticket?" Around the cabin, passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded slightly, caught up in Candace's confidence. Others pulled out their phones, sensing drama that would make good social media content. Furthermore, Candace continued, "I've seen this before. People buy economy tickets and then try to upgrade through various schemes. Online hacks, fake confirmations. even identity theft. Airlines lose millions every year to this kind of fraud. The words fraud and theft landed heavily. Terrence looked up from his phone, meeting Candace's eyes directly for the first time. "Ma'am, I understand you're concerned, but I can assure you my ticket was purchased legitimately." "Oh, I'm sure it was." Candace replied, sarcasm dripping from every word. "And I'm sure you have a very convincing explanation for how someone dressed like you managed to afford first class. Let me guess, you won it in a contest. Got upgraded as a diversity initiative. Maybe your employer is paying for it as part of some community outreach program." Each suggestion was designed to diminish him, to suggest that his presence was charity rather than commerce. Terrence felt the familiar burn of assumptions, the weight of proving himself worthy of spaces he'd already purchased. "I bought my ticket with my credit card," he said simply. "Just like everyone else." Candace laughed again, that sharp sound that was becoming her signature in this encounter. "Your credit card. Sir, do you have any idea what first class costs on this route? I'm a marketing executive, and even I have to think twice about paying full price." She turned to address the cabin more broadly, playing to her audience. "This is exactly what's wrong with giving people handouts instead of making them earn their way. They lose all sense of appropriate behavior. They think they can just show up anywhere and demand equal treatment." The college student in 2B, Michael Torres, shifted forward in his seat. He'd been recording since Candace's first outburst, and something about her tone was making his journalism instincts scream. This wasn't just a seating dispute. This was something uglier. "Ma'am," he said, his voice young but steady, "maybe we should let the airline staff sort this out instead of making assumptions." Candace whipped around to face him. "Assumptions. Young man, I'm a businesswoman. I assess situations for a living. And this situation is obviously fraudulent. The question is whether this airline is going to do something about it or let their security protocols be compromised." She pulled out her own phone, tapping rapidly. "I'm calling my contact at airport security. I think we need an official investigation into how this man obtained his boarding pass." Jessica Rivera's eyes widened. An official investigation meant paperwork delays and potentially missing their departure window. "Ma'am, please let me contact the gate agent first. Maybe we can resolve this quickly." "No," Candace said firmly. "This needs to be handled properly. I have meetings in Los Angeles that cannot be delayed. I cannot have my travel disrupted because someone decided to run a scam." She was typing rapidly on her phone now, and within moments she looked up with satisfaction. "Airport security is sending someone to the gate. They'll sort this out properly." Terrence watched this unfold with growing concern, not for himself, but for his daughter. Every minute this continued was another minute closer to missing Emma's science fair. He thought about standing up, walking away, taking a later flight. But something about Candace's smug certainty, her absolute conviction that he didn't belong, made him stay. Sometimes standing your ground wasn't about pride. Sometimes it was about principle. And sometimes it was about making sure your daughter grew up in a world where people like Candace Whitmore didn't get to decide who belonged where. Sir Jessica Rivera was back at his elbow. "I'm very sorry about this, but airport security is requesting that you step off the aircraft while they verify your travel documents." The words hit the cabin like thunder. Every passenger was now openly staring. Phones were recording from multiple angles, and Candace Whitmore was smiling like she'd just won the lottery. "Of course they are," she said sweetly. "Professional verification. It's standard protocol when someone's travel authorization is questionable." Terrence looked down at his phone. Another text from Emma Daddy. "Some kids already did their presentations. Mrs. Peterson says I'm up in 30 minutes. Where are you?" He closed his eyes and made a choice that would change everything. Michael Torres had been planning to sleep through the flight. Freshman year at UCLA was kicking his butt, and he'd spent the entire semester working on articles for the student newspaper while trying to keep his grades up. This trip back to Atlanta was supposed to be rest and relaxation, visiting his abuela and eating her cooking until he couldn't move. But now, he was wide awake phone recording, watching what felt like a civil rights violation happening in real time. His journalism professor, Dr. Martinez, was always telling his students to recognize when a story was developing in front of them. This was one of those moments. In seat 4A, Sarah Fleming was having her own crisis of conscience. She'd been a trauma nurse for 15 years, long enough to recognize when someone was being deliberately humiliated. The man in 3A wasn't aggressive, wasn't loud, wasn't doing anything except trying to travel in peace. But the woman attacking him was creating a spectacle that felt designed to shame him into leaving. Sarah had seen this before in hospital corridors when patients' families were assumed to be disruptive instead of desperate, when people were judged by appearance rather than need. It always made her sick, and it always made her speak up even when speaking up was uncomfortable. "Excuse me," she said, addressing Candace directly. "I'm a nurse and I've seen a lot of conflict resolution. This doesn't seem like it's about seating arrangements." Candace turned to face her eyebrows raised. "I'm sorry. Who are you, Sarah Fleming? I'm saying this looks like harassment, not verification." The words landed like a challenge. Other passengers shifted suddenly, forced to choose sides instead of just watching. An older businessman in 1A cleared his throat uncomfortably but said nothing. A young couple in the back of first class whispered to each other, the woman looking distressed, the man shaking his head. Meanwhile, at the boarding gate, Elena Vasquez was experiencing her own moment of recognition. As a senior gate agent for Elite Airways, she'd processed thousands of passengers over the past 8 years. She knew frequent flyers, she knew VIPs, and she definitely knew the face she was seeing on Michael Torres' live Instagram stream. Elena's phone was buzzing with notifications from the corporate emergency system. Something was happening on Flight 891 and she needed to pay attention. She pulled up the passenger manifest on her tablet, scrolling through first-class seating. Her breath caught when she reached seat 3A. Montgomery Terrence D. Not just any passenger, not even just a frequent flyer. The system showed a corporate designation she'd only seen a few times before principal stakeholder. She grabbed her phone and dialed the corporate emergency line. "This is Elena Vasquez at gate B17. We have a code silver situation on flight 891. Repeat, code silver. Principal stakeholder is being challenged by another passenger." On the other end of the line, Maria Santos, executive assistant to Montgomery Digital Services, felt her stomach drop. Code silver meant one of the company's primary owners was experiencing discrimination or safety issues while traveling. She'd hoped she'd never have to activate this protocol. "Are you certain?" Maria asked, already pulling up security feeds and corporate contact lists. "Positive identification," Elena confirmed. "And it's escalating. Security has been called to verify his travel documents." Maria closed her eyes. This was about to become a nightmare for everyone involved. Back on the aircraft, Captain David Walsh was reviewing his final pre-flight checklist when his corporate communication device buzzed with an urgent message. "Flight 891. Delay all departure procedures. Principal stakeholder situation developing. Await further instructions." Captain Walsh had been flying for Elite Airways for 12 years. He'd never seen a principal stakeholder alert. He didn't even know what it meant, but anything marked urgent from corporate meant serious attention was required. He unbuckled his seatbelt and headed toward the cabin, completely unaware that the situation developing was about to expose every bias and assumption he'd been carrying for decades. In the gate area, Robert Kane from Montgomery Digital Services' legal team was already pulling into the parking garage, his phone ringing nonstop. Maria Santos had activated the entire crisis response team, and within minutes, lawyers, executives, and public relations specialists would be converging on gate B17. The irony was lost on none of them. The man being humiliated and questioned about his right to fly first class owned the airline that was allowing it to happen. But Terrence Montgomery didn't want to be saved by corporate intervention. He wanted to see how far this would go. He wanted to understand exactly what assumptions and biases would have to be dismantled to ensure this never happened to anyone else. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is let the world reveal exactly who it is when no one thinks anyone important is watching. Airport security officer Martinez arrived at gate B-17 with the resigned expression of a man who'd seen every possible passenger dispute in his 15-year career. Drunk passengers, belligerent passengers, passengers trying to bring emotional support peacocks onto aircraft. But when Elena Vasquez briefed him on the situation, something felt different. "Ma'am," Officer Martinez said to Candace as he boarded the aircraft, "I understand there's a concern about a passenger's travel documentation." Candace's eyes lit up with vindication. "Officer, thank you so much for responding quickly. This man is sitting in first class with what appears to be fraudulent travel documents. I've been flying this route for years, and I can spot irregularities immediately." She gestured toward Terrence, who was still seated calmly, still looking at his daughter's science project, still texting her words of encouragement. "Look at him. Does he look like someone who belongs in a $3,000 seat? His clothes, his demeanor, everything about him screams economy passenger trying to upgrade illegally." Officer Martinez studied Terrence for a moment. 23 years of law enforcement had taught him to read people quickly, and the man in 3A wasn't exhibiting any of the nervous behaviors associated with fraud. No fidgeting, no avoiding eye contact, no defensive posturing. If anything, he seemed resigned to whatever was about to happen. Sir Officer Martinez said to Terrence, "Can you show me your boarding pass and identification?" Terrence looked up from his phone. Emma had just sent him a photo of her volcano complete with red food coloring for lava. It was beautiful, creative, and perfectly her. "Of course, officer. Here's my boarding pass and here's my driver's license." He handed over both documents without hesitation. Officer Martinez examined them carefully, comparing the photo ID to the man in front of him, checking the boarding pass details against his scanner. "Everything appears to be in order," Officer Martinez said, though he could feel Candace's agitation growing behind him. "Appears to be," Candace interjected. "Officer, with respect, appearance isn't enough. I work in corporate security consulting. I know how sophisticated document fraud has become. These documents need to be verified against the airline's secure database." She moved closer, speaking in a tone that suggested shared professional knowledge. "I've seen cases where people hack the check-in system, create false confirmations, even steal legitimate passengers' reservations. The fact that he's not dressed appropriately for first class suggests this needs deeper investigation." Officer Martinez felt the weight of her certainty. Candace carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to being believed, someone whose judgment was rarely questioned. She spoke the language of security protocols and risk assessment. She seemed to know what she was talking about. "Sir," he said to Terrence, "I'm going to need you to step off the aircraft while we run a more thorough verification of your travel arrangements." The words hit the cabin like a slap. Sarah Fleming, the nurse, stood up immediately. "This is ridiculous. His documents are valid. You just verified them yourself." "Ma'am," Officer Martinez replied, "I understand your concern, but when questions are raised about travel document authenticity, we have protocols to follow." Michael Torres continued recording his phone, capturing every word, every facial expression, every moment of what was clearly becoming an injustice. His live stream had dozens of viewers now, people commenting in real time about what they were witnessing. "This is messed up," one comment read. "That lady is clearly racist. Why isn't anyone stopping this?" read another. "Document this," wrote a third. "This man is going to have grounds for a massive lawsuit." Candace was now speaking directly to Captain Walsh, who had emerged from the cockpit looking confused and concerned. "Captain, I apologize for the delay, but this is a security issue that requires immediate attention. As someone who works in aviation consulting, I can tell you that allowing questionable passengers to remain on board puts everyone at risk." Captain Walsh. 52-years-old veteran of thousands of flights, found himself in unfamiliar territory. Passenger disputes usually involved seating assignments or carry-on luggage, not allegations of document fraud. The woman making the allegations seemed credible, professional, confident. The man she was accusing seemed calm, perhaps too calm. Sir Captain Walsh said to Terence, "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but we do need to resolve this before departure. If you could step off the aircraft temporarily while security verifies your travel authorization, we can get everyone on their way as quickly as possible." Terence looked around the cabin. 43 passengers, all watching, all making judgments. Some sympathetic, some suspicious, all recording. His phone buzzed again. "Emma, Daddy. My teacher says I can wait to present until you get here, but you have to hurry." He stood up slowly, gathering his tablet. His phone, his small carry-on bag. Every movement was watched, analyzed, interpreted. As he stepped into the aisle, Candace moved smoothly into seat 3A, settling in with the satisfaction of someone who'd successfully defended her territory. "Thank you, Captain," she said sweetly. "I know this was uncomfortable, but security has to come first. I'm sure you understand." As Terence walked down the aisle, preceded by Officer Martinez, he could hear whispers following him. "See, I knew something was off." Why else would he be so calm about leaving? Probably happens to him all the time. Each whisper was a small wound, but Terence had learned long ago that other people's assumptions said more about them than they did about him. The real wound was watching his departure time slip away, watching his daughter's science fair start without him. Elena Vasquez met them at the jet bridge, her face pale with stress. She knew exactly who Terence Montgomery was, and she knew exactly how badly this was about to explode. But her corporate emergency protocols were clear. Don't reveal principal stakeholder identity unless specifically authorized to do so. "Mr. Montgomery," she said quietly as they walked toward the gate area, "I've contacted corporate headquarters. This situation will be resolved very quickly." Officer Martinez caught the name and the tone of respect in Elena's voice. "Ma'am, is there something I should know about this passenger?" Elena looked at Terence, who gave her the slightest shake of his head. He wasn't ready to play that card yet. He wanted to see how far this would go. How many people would show their true beliefs when they thought no one important was watching. "No officer," Elena replied, "just following standard customer service protocols." But behind the scenes, phones were ringing across Montgomery Digital Services headquarters. Maria Santos had activated the full crisis response team. Robert Kane and his legal team were en route to the airport. Lisa Parker from Flight Operations was pulling security footage from every angle, and in the Elite Airways corporate boardroom emergency session was being called because someone had just discriminated against the man who owned their airline, and every single person who had participated was about to learn exactly what that meant. The gate area at B-17 had transformed into an impromptu courtroom with Terence Montgomery as the unwilling defendant in a trial where the charges kept changing, and the evidence was his appearance. Officer Martinez had set up his mobile verification station complete with laptop and scanner, while a growing crowd of departing passengers gathered to watch the drama unfold. Candace Whitmore had followed them off the aircraft, claiming she needed to provide context for the security investigation. She stood nearby, arms crossed, watching Terence with the satisfied expression of someone who'd successfully identified a threat to public safety. "Officer," she said, approaching Martinez's workstation, "I want to make sure you understand the full situation here. This isn't just about one fraudulent ticket. This is about a pattern of behavior I've observed on this route." Martinez looked up from his screen. "Pattern of behavior. I fly this route twice monthly for business." Candace explained, her voice carrying the authority of frequent travel. "I've noticed an increase in passengers who clearly don't belong in premium cabins. People who are obviously flying on someone else's dime, probably as part of diversity initiatives or community outreach programs." She gestured toward Terence, who was sitting quietly in one of the gate chairs, still texting with his daughter. "Look at him. Does anything about his presentation suggest he has the financial resources for first-class travel? His clothes look like they came from a discount store. He's traveling with a tablet instead of a proper business laptop. He doesn't carry himself like someone accustomed to premium service. Each observation was delivered with clinical precision designed to sound objective rather than prejudiced. But Sarah Fleming, who had also left the aircraft to witness this spectacle, felt sick listening to it. "Ma'am," Sarah interjected, "what someone wears or carries has nothing to do with whether they paid for their ticket legally." Candace turned to face her with barely concealed irritation. "Actually, it has everything to do with it. Professional travelers develop certain behaviors, certain standards. We invest in appropriate attire because we understand that first class is a business environment. When someone shows up looking like they're going to a barbecue, it raises legitimate questions." She pulled out her phone and showed Martinez a series of photos. "I've been documenting irregularities on this route for months. People who clearly don't belong in premium cabins, probably flying on upgraded tickets they obtained through various schemes. The airlines lose millions annually to this kind of fraud." Officer Martinez studied the photos on her phone. They showed various passengers in first class, all African American or Hispanic, all dressed casually. The implications were clear without being explicitly stated. "Ma'am, I appreciate your vigilance," Martinez said carefully, "but appearance alone isn't grounds for fraud investigation." "Appearance combined with behavior patterns," Candace corrected. "Look at how calm he is about this process. Most innocent passengers would be outraged, demanding to speak to managers, threatening lawsuits. But he's just sitting there resigned, like he's been through this before. That suggests familiarity with being caught in fraudulent travel." The logic was twisted but compelling. Terrence's dignity was being reinterpreted as guilt, his composure as evidence of criminality. Around the gate area, other passengers waited for their flights, many filming the confrontation with their phones. Michael Torres had followed the group off the aircraft and was now live streaming the entire proceeding. His viewer count had grown to over 200 people, with comments flying past faster than he could read them. "This is discrimination, plain and simple. Why is that woman so invested in this? Someone needs to stop this before it gets worse. I hope this man sues everyone involved." But it was getting worse. Martinez's verification was taking longer than usual because Candace kept interrupting with additional concerns, additional observations, additional reasons why deeper investigation was necessary. "Officer, I've also noticed he's been texting constantly since this began," she pointed out. "That's classic behavior for someone who's coordinating a story with accomplices, probably trying to make sure everyone has the same explanation for how he obtained the ticket." Terrence looked up from his phone where Emma's latest message read, "Daddy, they moved my presentation to last so you won't miss it. But Mrs. Peterson says the fair ends at 8 p.m. sharp." He realized that Candace's delaying tactics weren't just about proving him wrong. They were about ensuring that even if he was eventually cleared to travel, he'd miss his connection, miss his daughter's science fair, miss the moment he'd promised to be there for her. "Ma'am," he said to Candace, speaking directly to her for the first time since leaving the aircraft. "I understand you have concerns about my travel authorization, but I'm trying to get to Los Angeles to see my daughter's science fair. Could we please expedite this verification process?" Candace's expression shifted to something resembling sympathy, but her words carried poison. "Oh, I'm sure you have a very compelling story about why you need to travel urgently. That's another classic fraud technique, creating artificial time pressure to discourage thorough verification." She turned to Martinez. "Officer, I've seen this exact scenario before. Fraudulent passengers always have emotional stories designed to make security feel guilty for doing their jobs. Sick relatives, important events, family emergencies. It's manipulation." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Terrence felt something inside him finally crack, not with anger, but with profound sadness. This woman had taken his love for his daughter and turned it into evidence of criminality. She'd weaponized his fatherhood against him. Sir Martinez said, "I need you to step over here for additional document verification." What followed was a process designed to humiliate. Terrence was asked to empty his pockets, remove his jacket, submit to a pat-down search in full view of the gate area. Every moment was recorded by dozens of phones, every gesture analyzed by strangers who'd already made their judgments. Candace watched with satisfaction, occasionally offering commentary. Standard security protocols, she announced to nearby passengers. "This is how we keep flying safe for everyone." But Elena Vasquez was on the phone with Maria Santos, whispering urgently. "The situation is escalating. He's being searched publicly. We need intervention now." "Legal team is en route," Maria replied. "But he specifically instructed us not to reveal his identity until he gives the signal." "What signal?" "We'll know it when we see it." In the gate area, Terrence was being asked to explain every item in his possession. His tablet, his phone, his wallet, his mother's worn Bible that he'd carried for 20 years. Each item was examined, questioned, suspected. And through it all, his phone kept buzzing with messages from an 8-year-old girl who believed her father would move mountains to keep his promises. After 47 minutes of public humiliation disguised as security verification, Officer Martinez finally admitted what everyone with functioning eyes could see. Terrence Montgomery's travel documents were completely legitimate. The boarding pass was real. The ticket was paid for, and there was absolutely no evidence of fraud or irregularity. "Sir, I apologize for the delay," Martinez said, handing back Terrence's documents. "Your travel authorization is confirmed valid. You're cleared to board the aircraft." The words should have brought relief, but Terrence looked at his phone and felt his heart sink. 4:47 p.m. Eastern Time. Even if they left immediately, he would land in Los Angeles at 8:15 p.m. Pacific Time. Emma's science fair would be over. Her moment of triumph would happen without him watching from the front row like he'd promised. Candace Whitmore was not satisfied with this resolution. "Officer, I respect your conclusion, but I still have concerns about allowing this passenger back into first class. His behavior throughout this process has been suspicious, and frankly, I don't feel safe sitting next to someone who's been flagged for security investigation." She had moved effortlessly from accusing Terrence of fraud to claiming personal safety concerns. Each shift calculated to keep him away from the seat he'd legally purchased. Perhaps he could be accommodated in economy class where there's more oversight from the cabin crew. Martinez looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, if his ticket is valid for first class, he has the right to sit in first class." "But do I have the right to feel safe and comfortable in the seat I purchased?" Candace countered. "I'm a frequent flyer on this airline. I'm a business traveler whose comfort and safety should be a priority. If this passenger makes me uncomfortable, shouldn't that be taken into consideration?" The logic was insidious. She was weaponizing comfort against justice, using her status as a frequent flyer to override his rights as a paying passenger. And it was working. Captain Walsh emerged from the aircraft, looking stressed and frustrated. The delay had cost them their departure window, which meant they'd missed their arrival slot at LAX, which meant everyone's travel plans were disrupted because of what he increasingly understood was a manufactured controversy. "What's our status here?" he asked Martinez. "Passenger is cleared for travel. Documents are legitimate. Then let's get everyone back on board and get this flight moving." But Candace was ready for this moment. "Captain, I need to express serious concerns about my safety and comfort if this passenger returns to first class. His behavior throughout this investigation has been concerning, and I don't feel secure sitting in close proximity to someone who's been the subject of security scrutiny." Captain Walsh found himself in an impossible position. One passenger was claiming safety concerns, while another had been publicly humiliated for nearly an hour. The airline's policies prioritized passenger comfort, but they also prohibited discrimination. The problem was determining which policy applied here. "Sir," he said to Terrence, "I apologize for this situation. In the interest of getting everyone to their destination as quickly as possible, would you be willing to accept an economy seat? We'll refund the difference in fare, of course." The offer was reasonable on its surface, but Terrence understood what was really being asked. Accept discrimination to make the discriminator comfortable. Move to the back of the plane so the person who'd falsely accused him could enjoy the seat he'd purchased. Captain Terrence replied quietly, I bought a first-class ticket because I need the space to work, and because I want to arrive rested for my daughter's science fair. Moving to economy means accepting that this woman's comfort matters more than my rights as a paying customer. The words hung in the air between them. Captain Walsh realized he was being asked to choose sides in a situation that should never have escalated this far. But with departure already delayed and Candace threatening to file formal complaints about her safety concerns, the path of least resistance seemed clear. Sir, I understand your position, but passenger safety and comfort are my primary responsibilities. If you're willing to accept the economy accommodation, we can get everyone on their way immediately. Terrence looked around the gate area. Dozens of passengers were watching, recording, judging. Sarah Fleming, the nurse, shook her head in disgust. Michael Torres continued live streaming his comment section, exploding with outrage at what they were witnessing. Elena Vasquez appeared at his elbow. Mr. Montgomery, she whispered urgently, would you like me to contact corporate headquarters now? Terrence looked at his phone. Emma had sent another message. Daddy, where are you? They're starting to clean up. I think I missed my turn. He closed his eyes, made a decision that went against every instinct for justice he possessed, and nodded to Captain Walsh. I'll take the economy seat. The walk back onto the aircraft felt like a perp walk. Every passenger stared as he made his way down the aisle past first class where Candace Whitmore sat in his seat, scrolling through her phone with visible satisfaction. She didn't look up as he passed, but he could see her reflection in the window. She was smiling. Seat 28B was a middle seat between a sleeping businessman and a college student wearing noise-canceling headphones. The space that had been carefully chosen for work and comfort was replaced by cramped quarters where he could barely open his laptop. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the emotional weight of the text message waiting for him. Daddy, Mrs. Peterson said, you probably got stuck at work. It's okay. I'll show you my volcano at home. Terrence closed his eyes and let his daughter's understanding break his heart just a little bit more. While Terrence Montgomery sat in seat 28B trying to respond to his daughter's disappointed text message with words that wouldn't reveal his own heartbreak, the most expensive crisis management operation in aviation history was mobilizing around him. He just didn't know it yet. Elena Vasquez had returned to her gate station, but her focus wasn't on the departure board or passenger assistance requests. She was coordinating with Maria Santos at Montgomery Digital Services headquarters, providing real-time updates on a situation that was spiraling beyond anyone's control. He's in economy now, Elena reported, her voice tight with professional frustration. The woman who made the initial complaint is sitting in his first-class seat, and she's posting about it on social media. Maria Santos felt her stomach clench. She'd been Terrence's executive assistant for 6 years, and she'd never seen him accept discrimination so quietly. Usually he fought back immediately, not with anger, but with the kind of precise legal action that left discriminators unemployed and companies paying massive settlements. Why isn't he using the corporate card, Maria asked. He could end this immediately. He specifically told me not to reveal his identity unless he gives a signal, Elena replied. I think he wants to see how far this goes. How far it goes. Maria's voice rose. It's already gone too far. Our CEO is sitting in economy class while someone who falsely accused him of fraud enjoys the seat he paid for. This is a public relations nightmare. But Maria understood Terrence well enough to know that when he made a decision to let a situation play out, he had reasons that extended beyond personal comfort. He was gathering evidence, documenting behavior, building a case for changes that would be broader than just his own experience. Meanwhile, in the Montgomery Digital Services legal department, Robert Kane was assembling a response team that included civil rights attorneys, aviation lawyers, and public relations specialists. The live stream footage from Michael Torres had already been forwarded to their offices along with security camera footage from the gate area. We have clear documentation of discrimination based on racial appearance, Kane told his team. We have false accusations of fraud. We have a passenger being forced to accept inferior accommodations after being publicly humiliated. This is going to be a massive lawsuit. But sir, his associate counsel replied, Mr. Montgomery hasn't authorized any legal action yet. Our instructions are to monitor and document, but not to intervene. Kane shook his head. Then we document everything. Every moment, every word, every person who participated in this discrimination. When Terrence is ready to act, we'll have a case that will reshape airline industry policies forever. Back on Flight 891, Michael Torres was realizing that his live stream had grown far beyond his expectations. What started as a college student documenting an injustice had become a viral moment with over 1,500 viewers and climbing. The comments section was blazing with outrage, sympathy, and demands for accountability. Someone needs to find out who that woman is. One comment read, This man should sue everyone involved, wrote another. Why didn't anyone stand up for him? Asked a third. But perhaps most significantly, some viewers were beginning to recognize Terrence Montgomery. Tech industry followers, business news watchers, people who'd seen his face in Forbes or Fortune magazines were connecting the dots. Wait, is that? Terrence Montgomery from Montgomery Digital, one commenter asked. The tech billionaire. No way. I think it is. Someone should verify. Michael noticed these comments with growing excitement. If the man he'd been documenting was actually a prominent business leader, this story was about to become much bigger than a simple discrimination case. Sarah Fleming, the nurse who'd spoken up in first class, was having her own crisis of conscience. She'd returned to her seat, but she couldn't shake the image of Terrence's quiet dignity as he'd been humiliated and forced to move. In her 15 years as a trauma nurse, she'd learned to recognize when institutions failed people, and this was a textbook case of bias masquerading as security protocol. She pulled out her phone and began typing an email to Elite Airways customer service. But then she realized that customer service complaints wouldn't address what she'd witnessed. This required bigger action. Instead, she opened her recording app and began documenting everything she'd seen, providing a minute-by-minute account of the discrimination she'd witnessed. She was a credible professional witness, and she was going to make sure her testimony was preserved. This is Sarah Fleming, RN license number 47823, she began. I am documenting a clear case of racial discrimination I witnessed on Elite Airways Flight 891 on today's date. A black passenger was falsely accused of fraud, publicly humiliated, and forced to accept inferior accommodations based solely on his appearance and the assumptions of another passenger. Meanwhile, Candace Whitmore was experiencing her own moment of triumph. Seated comfortably in 3A, she was live tweeting her successful intervention in airline security. Sometimes you have to speak up when something doesn't look right, she posted. Security protocols exist for everyone's safety. Glad to see @Elite Airways takes passenger concerns seriously. Aviation security #safety. She included a carefully cropped photo of herself in the first-class cabin, looking satisfied and professional. Within minutes, the post had dozens of likes and several supportive comments from followers who appreciated her vigilance. But social media algorithms work in mysterious ways, and Candace's self-congratulatory posts were being served to users who'd been following the hashtags related to Michael's live stream. The connection between her celebration and the discrimination documentation was becoming clear to thousands of viewers. This woman is celebrating forcing a man out of his seat, one user posted. She's literally bragging about racial profiling, wrote another. Someone needs to identify this woman and her employer. The internet's capacity for detective work was about to turn Candace Whitmore's moment of victory into a career-ending mistake. Back at Montgomery Digital Services headquarters, Lisa Parker from Flight Operations was pulling security footage from every camera angle at Gate B-17. The company's relationship with Elite Airways included access to security systems for their executive protection protocols, and she was using every resource available to document the discrimination their CEO had endured. We have clear footage of the false accusation she reported to Maria Santos. We have audio of the racial implications. We have documentation of the forced relocation, and we have video of the perpetrator celebrating on social media while sitting in Terrence's seat. "How long until we land in LA?" Maria asked. 2 hours and 43 minutes. "But Maria, there's something else you need to know. The story is going viral. Hashtag Justice for Flight 891 is trending and people are starting to identify Terrence. This is going to explode when it becomes public knowledge that our CEO was discriminated against on his own airline." Maria closed her eyes, imagining the headlines that were already being written in newsrooms across the country. This wasn't just a discrimination case anymore. This was a story about power privilege assumptions and what happens when people reveal their true beliefs because they don't think anyone important is watching. And in 2 hours and 43 minutes, when Flight 891 landed in Los Angeles, the entire world was going to learn exactly who Terrence Montgomery really was. The Montgomery Digital Services War Room looked like mission control during a space launch crisis. 3 floors of the company's downtown Atlanta headquarters had been converted into a coordination center, with legal teams, public relations specialists, and executive assistants working from multiple conference rooms connected by secure video links. Maria Santos stood at the center of it all, coordinating responses to a situation that was evolving by the minute. On the wall-mounted screens around her live feeds showed social media trends, news aggregation sites, and the continuing live stream from Michael Torres, who was still documenting everything happening on Flight 891. Legal status. Maria asked Robert Kane, who was participating via video link from his car as he raced toward LAX. "We have documented evidence of discrimination, false accusation, and civil rights violations," Kane replied. "The live stream footage alone is enough for a federal case. But we also have security camera footage, witness testimony from the nurse, and social media posts from the perpetrator celebrating her actions." Media status. Maria asked Lisa Parker, who was monitoring news outlets and social platforms. The hashtag Justice for Flight 891 is trending nationally. We're seeing coverage requests from CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and the major networks. The story is shifting from discrimination to corporate accountability as people begin identifying Terrence. And the perpetrator, Candace Whitmore, VP of Marketing at Whitmore and Associates. Their company website is already being flooded with complaints. Her LinkedIn profile has been screenshot and shared thousands of times. And someone found her social media posts celebrating the discrimination. Maria felt a grim satisfaction. People who used social media to celebrate discriminating against others rarely considered that the internet never forgot and it never forgave public displays of racism. "What about Elite Airways corporate?" she asked. "That's the complicated part," replied David Chen from the Montgomery Digital legal team. "Technically, their crew followed standard protocols when a passenger raised security concerns. They're going to claim they were responding to a legitimate complaint, not engaging in discrimination, even though the complaint was obviously false and racially motivated. That's what makes this legally complex," David explained. "The flight crew didn't initiate the discrimination. They responded to it. But their response perpetuated it, and that's where we have grounds for action." Maria looked at the clock on the conference room wall. Flight 891 would land in 2 hours and 17 minutes. When Terrence stepped off that plane, he'd be walking into a media firestorm that would reshape not just Elite Airways, but the entire aviation industry's approach to passenger discrimination. "Okay, people," she announced to the room. "We have 2 hours to build the most comprehensive discrimination case in aviation history. I want documentation of every similar incident in the past 5 years. I want social media posts from Candace Whitmore going back 2 years. I want Elite Airways' training materials on passenger verification. I want everything." Meanwhile, at Whitmore and Associates, a very different kind of crisis was developing. Candace Whitmore's assistant, Jennifer Walsh, had been fielding angry phone calls for the past hour from people who'd seen the live stream footage and connected it to Candace's celebratory social media posts. Ms. Whitmore Jennifer said urgently when she finally reached Candace on the aircraft phone, "We have a serious problem. The incident on your flight is all over social media, and people are identifying you as the woman who made the discrimination complaint." Candace felt a chill of concern, but not panic. "What exactly are they saying?" "They're saying you racially profiled a passenger and forced him out of his seat. There's video footage and it's going viral. The company phones haven't stopped ringing." Jennifer calmed down. "I reported a legitimate security concern. Everything I did was appropriate and responsible. Sometimes people don't like it when security protocols are enforced, but that doesn't make enforcement wrong. Ma'am, with respect, the social media posts show you celebrating sitting in his seat. People are interpreting that as you celebrating discrimination." For the first time, Candace felt a flicker of genuine concern. Social media had a way of taking situations out of context, of making reasonable actions look unreasonable when viewed through the lens of viral outrage. "I'll handle this when I land," she told Jennifer. "Just take messages for now. This will blow over in a few days." But Jennifer was looking at her computer screen, watching the hashtag trends, seeing the anger building across multiple platforms. This wasn't going to blow over in a few days. This was going to get much, much worse. Back on Flight 891, Terrence was finally responding to his daughter's messages. "Sweetheart, Daddy got delayed at the airport. I'm so sorry I missed your presentation. Can you save the volcano demonstration for when I get home tomorrow?" Emma's response came quickly. "It's okay, Daddy." Mrs. Peterson said, "Family things happen sometimes. But I got third place, and I took a video to show you." Terrence smiled despite everything that had happened. His 8-year-old daughter had handled disappointment with more grace than most of the adults around him. Her resilience reminded him that this situation wasn't about his personal comfort or convenience. It was about ensuring that her generation grew up in a world where people weren't judged by their appearance or treated differently because of their race. "I'm so proud of you, Emma. Third place is amazing. I can't wait to see your video. Daddy, why do you sound sad? Did something bad happen?" Terrence paused, considering how to explain complex issues of discrimination and bias to a child who still believed the world was fundamentally fair. Daddy had to deal with some people who made wrong assumptions today. But it's going to be okay. Sometimes these situations help make things better for everyone. "Did you use your quiet voice like you taught me?" "Yes, sweetheart. I used my quiet voice." "Good. Quiet voices are stronger than loud voices." Terrence closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his daughter's wisdom. She was right, of course. Quiet voices were stronger than loud voices. And in about 2 hours, his quiet voice was going to become very, very loud. As Flight 891 cruised at 37,000 feet over the American Southwest, Terrence Montgomery sat in his cramped middle seat and did something that would have surprised every corporate boardroom where he'd ever negotiated. He practiced radical patience. Not the passive patience of someone waiting for rescue, but the strategic patience of someone building a case that would create lasting change. He opened his worn leather Bible to a passage his mother had marked years ago. "The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Exodus 14:14. She'd highlighted those words after his first discrimination lawsuit in college when a professor had accused him of cheating on an exam because students like him couldn't possibly achieve such high scores without help. Then, as now, Terrence had chosen to let the system reveal itself completely before responding. The professor's bias had eventually cost him his tenure, and the lawsuit had funded Terrence's graduate school education. More importantly, it had established policies that protected other students from similar discrimination. Now he was doing it again on a larger scale with higher stakes. His phone buzzed with a message from Maria Santos. Sir, we have comprehensive documentation of everything that happened. Legal team is standing by. We can resolve this immediately upon landing. Terrence typed back. Let it play out. I want to see who else reveals their true beliefs when they think no one important is watching. The strategy was risky. Every minute he remained in economy class while Candace Whitmore enjoyed his first-class seat was another minute of personal humiliation. Every text from Emma asking why he'd missed her science fair was another reminder of the cost of his patience. But Terrence understood that individual justice was temporary while institutional change was permanent. He was building evidence not just against Candace Whitmore, but against the entire system that had allowed her discrimination to be validated and reinforced. The flight attendant who'd accepted her word over his documents. The security officer who'd subjected him to public search based on her accusations. The captain who'd asked him to accept inferior accommodations to make his discriminator comfortable. Each person who'd participated in the discrimination had revealed something about their assumptions, their biases, their willingness to believe the worst about someone based on appearance. And all of it was being documented, recorded, preserved for the reckoning that was coming. Around him, other passengers in economy class were beginning to recognize him from the live stream that was still trending on social media. A businessman across the aisle leaned over nervously. "Excuse me, sir. I hate to bother you, but aren't you Terrence Montgomery?" The tech CEO. Terrence looked up from his Bible, meeting the man's eyes directly. "Yes, I am." The businessman's face went pale. "Oh my God, you're the guy from the video. The discrimination. But if you're Terrence Montgomery, then I'm the person who was just forced to move to economy class based on false accusations of fraud." Terrence finished quietly. Word spread through the economy section quickly. Passengers pulled out phones, some taking pictures, others researching Montgomery Digital Services, all of them realizing they were witnessing something historic. The quiet man in seat 28B wasn't just a victim of discrimination. He was one of the most powerful people in technology. And he'd let himself be humiliated rather than use that power to escape the situation. "Why didn't you say something?" the businessman asked. "Why didn't you tell them who you are?" Terrence closed his Bible, marking his place carefully. "Because the moment I revealed my identity, this would have become about me specifically, rather than about the system that allows this to happen to anyone. I wanted to see how far people would go when they thought I couldn't fight back." And now Terrence checked the flight tracker on the seatback screen. 1 hour and 15 minutes to Los Angeles. 1 hour and 15 minutes until the most expensive lesson in corporate accountability in aviation history. Now everyone who participated in this discrimination is about to learn that dignity isn't determined by appearance and power isn't always visible to people who judge by surfaces. His phone buzzed with another message from Emma Daddy. "I'm making you a special certificate for missing my science fair. It says, 'World's best daddy even when airplanes are mean.' Love you." Terrence smiled, typing back. "I love you too, sweetheart. Daddy's about to make sure airplanes are never mean like this again." The countdown to landing had begun, and when Flight 891 touched down in Los Angeles, the entire world was going to learn what happened when you discriminated against someone who owned the airline. Los Angeles International Airport's ground control received an unusual request at 7:23 p.m. Pacific Time. Flight 891 from Atlanta was requesting priority deplaning assistance for a principal stakeholder situation. The air traffic controller had never seen that designation before, but the request came with highest-level authorization codes that meant immediate compliance. Elite Airways Flight 891. You are cleared for Gate 47A with priority ground support. Emergency vehicles and corporate liaison team standing by. Captain Walsh received the message in his cockpit with growing confusion. Emergency vehicles corporate liaison team, for what he'd understood was a routine passenger disagreement. Something was very wrong with his understanding of the situation. As the Boeing 737 approached LAX, passengers in first class began noticing unusual activity on the ground. Multiple Elite Airways vehicles were positioned near Gate 47A, along with what appeared to be news crews and a cluster of people in expensive suits carrying briefcases. Candace Whitmore was also noticing the commotion, but she interpreted it as validation of her security concerns. "See," she told the passenger next to her. "I knew something was serious about that man. Corporate security teams don't respond like this unless there's a real threat." She was so satisfied with her analysis that she live-tweeted again, landing in LA to proper security response. Sometimes vigilance pays off. Elite Airways knows how to handle passenger safety. #aviation security. Meanwhile, in economy class, Terrence was receiving a different kind of message from Maria Santos. "Sir, we have media crews from 6 networks at the gate. Legal team is in position. Executive team is standing by. Are you ready to proceed?" Terrence looked around the economy cabin where several passengers were now openly filming him, recognizing that they were witnessing something historic. The college student next to him was recording everything for her TikTok account. The businessman across the aisle was texting rapidly, probably telling friends and colleagues that he was flying with Terrence Montgomery. Maria Terrence typed back, "I want everyone who participated in the discrimination to be present when the revelation happens. Every crew member, every security officer, every corporate representative who validated what happened to me." "Already arranged, sir." Gate B-17 in Atlanta has also been secured for simultaneous action. As Flight 891 taxied toward the gate, Michael Torres was providing live commentary to his live stream audience, which had grown to over 8,000 viewers. "We're about to land, and I've never seen this much corporate activity for a regular flight. Something big is about to happen." His comment section was exploding with speculation and demands for justice. People who'd been following the story for 3 hours were emotionally invested in the outcome, and they wanted accountability for what they'd witnessed. Sarah Fleming, the nurse, was also preparing for landing with a sense of anticipation. She'd spent the flight documenting everything she'd observed, and she was ready to serve as a witness for whatever legal action was coming. As a healthcare professional, she understood the importance of accurate documentation in situations involving institutional discrimination. Captain Walsh announced final descent, but his voice carried an unusual tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing in Los Angeles in approximately 12 minutes. Please prepare for arrival and remain seated until the aircraft comes to a complete stop at the gate." What he didn't announce was the message he'd just received from Elite Airways corporate headquarters. "Priority passenger requires immediate corporate consultation upon deplaning. Maintain all crew positions until corporate team arrives." Elena Vasquez had flown from Atlanta to Los Angeles on the next available flight, carrying a folder of documentation and authorization codes that would reshape how Elite Airways handled discrimination complaints forever. She was positioned in the jet bridge, waiting for the moment when everything would be revealed. Robert Kane and his legal team were positioned in the gate area with laptops, cameras, and recording equipment. They had 3 hours of preparation time to build the most comprehensive discrimination case in aviation history, and they were ready to present it to every media outlet in the country. As the plane touched down at LAX, Terrence closed his eyes and said a quiet prayer. Not for revenge against the people who'd discriminated against him, but for the wisdom to use this moment to create lasting change that would protect other passengers from similar humiliation. The aircraft rolled to a stop at Gate 47A. The seatbelt sign turned off, and Candace Whitmore stood up to retrieve her luggage, completely unaware that she was about to experience the most expensive lesson in consequences she'd ever receive. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Walsh announced, his voice noticeably strained, "we ask that all passengers remain seated for just a moment while we address a corporate matter. This will only take a few minutes." Candace frowned, checking her phone impatiently. She had a car service waiting and dinner reservations that couldn't be delayed. But as she looked out the aircraft window, she saw something that made her pause. A convoy of elite Airways executives walking up the jet bridge, led by a woman in an expensive suit carrying official-looking documents. For the first time in 3 hours, Candace Whitmore began to suspect that her understanding of the situation might be incomplete. Elena Vasquez entered the aircraft, first followed by Robert Kane and 3 Montgomery Digital Services executives in tailored suits. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. The casual routine atmosphere of passenger deplaning shifted into something that felt like a corporate boardroom where verdicts were about to be delivered. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elena announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone delivering official business. "I need Captain Walsh, all flight attendants, and passenger Candace Whitmore to remain available for immediate corporate consultation. All other passengers may deplane normally through the forward exit." Candace felt her stomach flutter with the first hint of real concern. Why was she being specifically mentioned by name? How did this corporate representative even know who she was? "Excuse me," Candace said, standing and approaching Elena. "I'm not sure why I'm being detained, but I have a car service waiting and important dinner plans. If this is about the security situation earlier, I'd be happy to provide a statement, but I can't be delayed." Elena looked at her with an expression that was professional but cold. "Ms. Whitmore, this consultation is mandatory for all individuals involved in today's passenger discrimination incident. You will not be leaving this aircraft until it's completed." The word discrimination hit Candace like a physical blow. Discrimination. I reported a legitimate security concern. I followed appropriate protocols. I helped ensure passenger safety. Ma'am Robert Kane stepped forward, introducing himself with business card extended. "I'm Robert Kane, Chief Legal Counsel for Montgomery Digital Services. We need to discuss your allegations of fraud against our client, Terrence Montgomery." Candace stared at the business card, the expensive suit, the briefcases, the official documentation being arranged on tray tables throughout first class. Montgomery Digital Services. The name was familiar, but she couldn't immediately place it. "I don't understand," she said, her voice losing some of its earlier confidence. "Who is Terrence Montgomery?" Elena opened her tablet and showed Candace the Forbes magazine cover from 6 months earlier. Tech Titans, the new billionaires reshaping American business. Terrence Montgomery's photo was prominently featured along with his company valuation and his stake in various industries, including his 73% ownership of Elite Airways. Candace's face drained of color as the reality began to sink in. The man she'd accused of fraud, the man she'd forced out of first class, the man she'd subjected to public humiliation and security searches wasn't just any passenger. He was the owner of the airline. "Oh my God," she whispered, sinking back into seat 3A. The seat she'd claimed with such satisfaction, the seat she'd celebrated obtaining on social media, belonged to the man who owned the entire aircraft. "Ms. Whitmore, Robert Kane," continued my client, "documented 3 hours of racial discrimination, false accusations, and civil rights violations. Every word you spoke, every action you took, and every celebration you posted on social media has been preserved as evidence." He opened his laptop and turned it toward her. The screen showed her own Twitter feed with her celebratory posts about aviation security and proper protocols displayed alongside screenshots from Michael Torres's live stream showing her discriminatory behavior. "Your social media posts celebrating the discrimination have been viewed over 200,000 times, Kane explained. "They've been screenshot shared and preserved in our legal documentation." Captain Walsh had been listening to this exchange with growing horror, realizing that his own decisions throughout the incident were about to be scrutinized by the owner of his airline. "Sir," he said to Robert Kane, "I want to clarify that I was responding to what appeared to be legitimate passenger safety concerns. If I made an error in judgment, I apologize." Captain Elena replied, "Mr. Montgomery will address all crew members individually." But your decision to ask a paying first-class passenger to accept economy accommodations based on false accusations will require immediate review. Meanwhile, in economy class, Terence was finally standing up, gathering his belongings, and preparing to walk forward to reclaim not just his seat, but his dignity. Other passengers in economy watched in amazement as they realized they'd been flying with the owner of the airline. Sir, the businessman who'd recognized him earlier, said, "I want to apologize for not speaking up when I saw what was happening. I should have said something." "Thank you," Terence replied quietly. "But the real question is what all of us do the next time we see discrimination happening to someone who might not have the resources to fight back." As Terence walked forward through the aircraft past rows of passengers recording his every step, Candace Whitmore was experiencing the complete collapse of her carefully constructed narrative. The man she'd described as obviously fraudulent was worth more money than everyone on the aircraft combined. The man she'd claimed didn't belong in first class owned every seat on the plane. Ms. Whitmore, Terence said as he approached seat 3A, his voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "I believe you're sitting in my seat." The words were identical to her opening accusation 3 hours earlier, but the power dynamic had shifted completely. Candace struggled to stand her legs, shaking her face pale with the realization of how catastrophically she'd misjudged the situation. "Mr. Montgomery, I didn't know. I mean, I was trying to. Security protocols. I thought—" "You thought what exactly?" Terence asked, settling into seat 3B and opening his laptop. "You thought that because I'm black and dressed casually, I couldn't possibly afford a first-class ticket. You thought that your assumptions about my appearance gave you the right to subject me to public humiliation?" Candace opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again without making sound. There was no explanation that could justify what she'd done. No interpretation that could make her behavior appear reasonable in retrospect. "Sir," she finally whispered, "I sincerely apologize. I made a terrible mistake in judgment." Terence looked up from his laptop where Emma's volcano video was paused at the moment of eruption. "Ms. Whitmore, your mistake wasn't in judgment. Your mistake was in revealing exactly who you are when you thought no one important was watching." The corporate response that followed was swift, comprehensive, and unprecedented in aviation history. Robert Kane opened his briefcase and began distributing documents that would reshape Elite Airways policies forever, while Elena Vasquez coordinated with headquarters to implement immediate changes across the entire airline network. "Ms. Whitmore," Robert Kane began, "you are hereby permanently prohibited from traveling on any Elite Airways aircraft. This ban extends to all Montgomery Digital Services partner airlines, which includes 17 major carriers worldwide." Candace felt the blood drain from her face as the scope of her consequences became clear. Her job required constant travel. Being banned from 17 airlines would make her position at Whitmore and Associates impossible to maintain. Additionally, Kane continued, "Your social media posts celebrating the discrimination have been preserved as evidence in a federal civil rights lawsuit. You will be receiving formal legal papers within 48 hours. "But I didn't know," Candace protested weakly. "If I had known who he was, I never would have—" "Exactly," Terence interjected quietly. "If you had known I was powerful, you would have treated me differently. But because you assumed I was powerless, you felt free to subject me to humiliation and false accusations. That's precisely what makes this discrimination." Elena Vasquez was documenting every word of the conversation while coordinating with Elite Airways executives who were watching via video link from corporate headquarters. "Captain Walsh," she said, "you are suspended immediately pending investigation of your handling of this discrimination incident. First Officer Rodriguez will assume command for all remaining duties." Captain Walsh's 20-year career with Elite Airways was crashing around him as he realized that his decision to prioritize one passenger's comfort over another passenger's rights had cost him everything he'd worked for. "Jessica Rivera." Elena continued, "You are being promoted to senior flight attendant, and will be participating in the development of new anti-discrimination training protocols. Your attempts to verify documentation and your professional demeanor throughout this incident have been noted. Jessica's relief was visible as she realized that her careful navigation of an impossible situation had been recognized rather than punished. Officer Martinez Robert Kane addressed the security officer via phone. You are required to attend mandatory bias training and will be subject to performance review for your handling of this incident. Subjecting a passenger to public search based on false accusations violated several federal protocols, but the most significant consequence was still being prepared. Elena opened her tablet and showed the cabin a live video feed from Montgomery Digital Services headquarters, where Maria Santos was addressing a room full of reporters and cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press," Maria announced, "Montgomery Digital Services is implementing the most comprehensive anti-discrimination initiative in transportation history. Effective immediately, all Montgomery-owned airlines will institute the Montgomery Protocol for Passenger Dignity. The protocol she described was revolutionary. Any passenger claiming discrimination would receive immediate corporate review. Any employee participating in discriminatory behavior would face immediate termination. Any passenger making false accusations based on racial bias would be permanently banned from all partner airlines. Furthermore, Maria continued, Mr. Montgomery has established a $50 million fund for passengers who experience discrimination on any airline. Legal representation, financial compensation, and advocacy services will be provided free of charge to ensure that no passenger faces discrimination alone. In the aircraft, Candace Whitmore was watching her career, her travel privileges, and her reputation disintegrate in real time. The woman who had celebrated proper security protocols 3 hours earlier was now the face of airline discrimination worldwide. "Mr. Montgomery," she said desperately, "please, isn't there some way to resolve this? I've learned my lesson. I'll never make assumptions like this again. I'll do community service sensitivity training, whatever you require." Terrence looked up from his laptop where he'd finally responded to Emma's messages. "Ms. Whitmore, the time for learning lessons was before you decided to humiliate someone based on their skin color. The time for sensitivity was before you celebrated forcing someone out of a seat they'd legally purchased." He stood up, gathering his belongings. "But you're right about one thing. You will never make assumptions like this again. Because after today you won't have the platform or the access to discriminate against anyone." As Terrence walked off the aircraft, followed by his legal team, and Elena Vasquez, passengers throughout the cabin sat in stunned silence. They had witnessed the complete and total accountability of someone who had thought their bias was consequence-free. Michael Torres was still live streaming, providing commentary to an audience that had grown to over 20,000 viewers. "I've never seen anything like this," he told his audience. "Complete justice, immediate consequences, and policies that will protect other passengers forever." Candace Whitmore remained in seat 3A, staring at her phone where notifications of her firing from Whitmore and Associates had just arrived via email. Her LinkedIn profile was being flooded with comments about the discrimination video. Her Twitter mentions were overwhelming her phone's capacity. She had gone from corporate executive to unemployed pariah in 3 hours, all because she had assumed that a black man in casual clothes couldn't possibly belong in first class. The aircraft was finally empty, except for Candace and the remaining crew members who were avoiding eye contact with her as they prepared for their own consequences and reviews. Candace looked around the first-class cabin that she had fought so hard to claim the seat that had cost her everything she'd worked for, and realized that her 3-hour flight had been the most expensive journey of her life. The Montgomery Protocol was implemented across Elite Airways' entire network before sunrise the next morning. In an unprecedented display of corporate accountability, every Elite Airways employee, from gate agents to senior executives, received mandatory anti-discrimination training that began with a detailed case study, the treatment of Terrence Montgomery on Flight 891. Maria Santos stood in the Montgomery Digital Services boardroom at 6:00 a.m. Pacific Time, coordinating the largest single-day policy overhaul in aviation history. On the wall screens around her live feeds showed training sessions beginning simultaneously at 47 airports across North America. Legal status report she requested from Robert Kane, who had worked through the night preparing documentation. Federal civil rights lawsuit filed at 5:33 a.m., Kane reported. Candace Whitmore Elite Airways Airport Security and the captain are all named defendants. Damages are estimated at $50 million, but more importantly, the settlement will require industry-wide policy changes. Media response: CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and all major networks are leading with the story. The hashtag #Montgomery Protocol is trending worldwide. We've received interview requests from 67 media outlets and solidarity statements from civil rights organizations across the country. The story had captured public imagination because it combined justice with consequence in a way that rarely happened in discrimination cases. Usually, victims of airline discrimination faced months or years of legal battles with uncertain outcomes. But when the victim owned the airline, justice was swift and comprehensive. Elite Airways CEO Margaret Foster was conducting her own crisis management from the company's headquarters in Dallas. The airline's stock price had dropped 12% overnight as investors worried about the legal and reputational consequences of the discrimination scandal. But early morning trading showed signs of recovery as news of the Montgomery Protocol spread. The protocol is being viewed positively by institutional investors, Foster's chief financial officer reported. They're interpreting it as proactive leadership rather than defensive reaction. Consumer confidence surveys show strong approval for the anti-discrimination measures. Foster nodded grimly. Good, because we're implementing these changes permanently, not just as public relations. What happened to Mr. Montgomery was unacceptable, and it revealed weaknesses in our training and protocols that need immediate correction. Meanwhile, at Whitmore and Associates, emergency board meetings were being held to address the catastrophic public relations nightmare that Candace Whitmore had created for the company. Her discrimination of Terrence Montgomery hadn't just cost her personally. It had exposed the company to potential liability and boycotts from clients who refused to work with businesses that tolerated discriminatory behavior. Effective immediately announced Whitmore and Associates CEO Patricia Whitmore, Candace's sister-in-law Candace Whitmore, is terminated for cause. Her actions do not represent the values of this company, and we are implementing comprehensive bias training for all employees. The company's social media accounts were being flooded with demands for accountability, and several major clients had already canceled contracts pending review of the company's diversity and inclusion policies. Back at LAX, Terrence was conducting an impromptu press conference in the Elite Airways Executive Lounge, surrounded by reporters, cameras, and civil rights activists who had flown in overnight to show support. "This isn't about revenge," Terrence explained to the assembled media. "This is about ensuring that what happened to me never happens to anyone else." Every day, passengers are discriminated against based on their appearance, their race, their perceived economic status. Most of them don't have the resources to fight back. This protocol will level that playing field. Mr. Montgomery asked a reporter from CNN, "Do you believe Ms. Whitmore's actions were representative of broader problems in the aviation industry?" "I believe Ms. Whitmore's actions were representative of assumptions that exist throughout our society," Terrence replied. "She saw a black man in casual clothes and assumed he didn't belong in first class. That assumption led to false accusations, public humiliation, and civil rights violations. Those assumptions exist everywhere, not just in airports. What message do you have for other passengers who might experience similar discrimination?" Terrence pulled out his phone and showed the room Emma's latest message. "Daddy, Mrs. Peterson showed our whole class the news about you. She said you're making airplanes fair for everyone." "I'm proud of you. My message," Terrence said, "is that dignity is not negotiable. No one should accept discrimination because it's easier than fighting back. And starting today, no one has to fight back alone. The Montgomery Foundation will provide legal representation and support for anyone who experiences discrimination while traveling. At 8:47 p.m. Pacific Time, Terrence Montgomery finally walked into the gymnasium at Emma's elementary school in Westwood. The science fair had officially ended 47 minutes earlier, but Mrs. Peterson and a small group of parents and students had waited specifically to see his arrival. Emma spotted him from across the room and ran toward him with the kind of joy that makes everything else disappear. "Daddy, you made it. I knew you would come." Terrence knelt down and hugged his daughter, feeling the weight of the day's events shift into perspective. Fighting discrimination was important, creating lasting change was necessary, but being present for his little girl's excitement about her volcano project was what mattered most. "I'm sorry I missed your presentation, sweetheart," he said softly. "But I heard you got 3rd place. I'm so proud of you." "It's okay, Daddy. Mrs. Peterson told everyone about what happened on your airplane. She said you were being brave like the people in our history books. Are you famous now?" Terrence laughed, the first genuine laughter he'd experienced in 12 hours. "I don't know about famous, Em. I just wanted to make sure other people don't have to go through what Daddy went through today." Emma's teacher, Mrs. Peterson, approached them with a warm smile. "Mr. Montgomery, I want you to know that we use today's events as a teaching moment about civil rights and standing up for what's right." Emma was so proud to tell everyone about her daddy's courage. "Thank you," Terrence replied. "Though I'm not sure courage is the right word. Sometimes standing up for what's right is just doing what has to be done." "Can I show you my volcano now?" Emma asked eagerly. "I saved the best explosion for when you got here." For the next 30 minutes, Terrence forgot about lawsuits and protocols and policy changes. He watched his daughter demonstrate her science project, listened to her explain the chemical reactions that created the eruption, and marveled at her creativity and intelligence. Other parents approached throughout the evening, some to express support for his actions, others to share their own experiences with discrimination while traveling. Each conversation reinforced his understanding that what had happened to him was part of a much larger pattern of bias and assumption that needed to be addressed. Mr. Montgomery said Janet Torres Michael's mother, "I want to thank you for how you handled this situation. My son has been following the story all day, and he's learned more about dignity and justice from watching you than from any textbook." "Your son showed real courage today," Terrence replied. "His documentation of what happened helped ensure that there was accountability. He should be proud of his journalism instincts." As they drove home through Los Angeles traffic, Emma chattering about her classmates' science projects and her plans for next year's fair, Terrence received a text message from Sarah Fleming, the nurse who had spoken up during the discrimination. "Mr. Montgomery, I want you to know how much I admire your restraint and dignity throughout that horrible experience. As a healthcare worker, I've seen how bias affects patient care, and I believe the protocols you're implementing will save lives. Thank you for turning your pain into progress." Emma noticed him smiling at his phone. "Good news, Daddy." "Yes, sweetheart. People are saying nice things about the changes we're making to help other travelers. Will the mean lady learn to be nicer?" Terrence considered how to explain complex concepts of accountability and consequence to an 8-year-old. "The mean lady will face consequences for her actions, Em. But more importantly, we're making rules that will help prevent other people from being mean like she was." "Good," Emma said firmly. "Everyone should be nice on airplanes." When they arrived home, Terrence's phone showed 47 missed calls and hundreds of text messages from colleagues, friends, civil rights leaders, and reporters. But before returning any of them, he sat with Emma on their living room couch and watched her volcano video 3 times in a row. "Daddy," Emma said as she curled up next to him, "were you scared today when the mean lady was being mean?" "A little bit," Terrence admitted. "But I remembered something Grandma used to tell me. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." So I stayed calm and let the truth speak for itself. And it worked. It worked, sweetheart. Truth always works, even when it takes time. As Emma fell asleep on the couch, still wearing her science fair ribbon, Terrence finally allowed himself to process the full emotional weight of the day. He'd been humiliated, discriminated against, and forced to endure public scrutiny of his right to travel in dignity. But he'd also created a framework for justice that would protect thousands of other passengers from similar experiences. His phone buzzed with one final message, this one from Michael Torres, Mr. Montgomery. "Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. I'm changing my major to civil rights journalism because of what I witnessed today." Terrence smiled carefully, lifting Emma to carry her to her bedroom, where her third-place science fair ribbon would join the growing collection of achievements that made him proud every single day. Tomorrow, there would be more interviews, more legal proceedings, more policy implementations. But tonight, he was simply a father who had kept his promise to make the world a little bit fairer for his daughter's generation. Within 72 hours of Flight 891's landing in Los Angeles, the Montgomery Protocol had been voluntarily adopted by 12 major airlines across North America and Europe. The speed of industry adoption was unprecedented, driven by a combination of public pressure, legal liability concerns, and genuine recognition that aviation industry culture needed fundamental change. American Airlines announced implementation on Wednesday morning, followed by Delta United and Southwest, before close of business. International carriers, including British Airways Lufthansa and Air France, committed to adapted versions of the protocol for their operations. "We're witnessing the fastest voluntary policy change in aviation history," noted Dr. Patricia Williams, director of the Civil Rights and Transportation Institute at Georgetown University. Usually, industry-wide changes require federal mandate or years of litigation. But the documentation of Mr. Montgomery's treatment was so clear, and the response so comprehensive, that airlines are racing to implement protections rather than risk similar incidents. The protocol's key components became the new industry standard overnight. Immediate corporate review of discrimination claims zero tolerance for false accusations based on racial bias, mandatory sensitivity training for all customer-facing employees, and comprehensive support for passengers who experienced discriminatory treatment. Robert Kane and his legal team were fielding calls from passengers across the country who had experienced similar discrimination but lacked resources to pursue legal action. "We're seeing reports of incidents from the past 5 years that were never properly investigated," Kane reported. Flight attendants refusing to serve black passengers, gate agents questioning document validity based on appearance, security officers conducting unnecessary searches of minority travelers. The Montgomery Foundation's hotline received over 3,000 calls in its first week of operation, documenting patterns of discrimination that had been largely invisible because individual victims couldn't afford legal representation. Meanwhile, the consequences for those who had participated in Terrence's discrimination continued to unfold. Candace Whitmore's termination from Whitmore & Associates was followed by a federal investigation into her pattern of discriminatory complaints against minority passengers. Records showed she had filed 17 similar security concerns over the past 3 years, all targeting passengers of color. Ms. Whitmore's behavior represents a deliberate pattern of harassment disguised as security vigilance, federal prosecutor James Martinez announced. This goes beyond a single incident of bias to intentional civil rights violations that deserve serious legal consequence. Captain Walsh's suspension was converted to permanent termination after investigation revealed he had prioritized passenger comfort over passenger rights in multiple previous incidents. His 20-year career ended with a settlement that included financial compensation to affected passengers and a commitment to undergo extensive bias training before seeking employment with any other airline. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural. Airport terminals across the country began displaying signs about passenger dignity and anti-discrimination policies. Gate agents received training on recognizing and interrupting bias-based complaints. Flight crews were taught to distinguish between legitimate security concerns and harassment disguised as vigilance. Michael Torres, the college journalism student whose live stream had documented the entire incident, was offered internships at CNN, MSNBC, and The Washington Post. His coverage of the discrimination and its aftermath had been viewed over 2 million times and was being used in journalism schools as an example of citizen reporting that created social change. What Michael did, explained Professor Janet Davis at UCLA's journalism school, was provide real-time documentation that made denial impossible. When institutions know they're being watched, they behave differently. When bad behavior is immediately broadcast to thousands of viewers, consequences become inevitable. Sarah Fleming. The nurse who had spoken up during the incident was invited to join the Montgomery Foundation's advisory board, helping to develop protocols for bystander intervention in discrimination situations. Most people want to do the right thing, she explained. They just need frameworks for how to safely and effectively interrupt bias when they witness it. The ripple effects extended beyond aviation into other industries. Hotels, restaurants, retail establishments, and entertainment venues began reviewing their own policies for handling discrimination complaints and false accusations based on racial bias. Corporate America was learning that in an age of smartphones and social media, discriminatory behavior could be documented, shared, and prosecuted in real time. The old assumption that individual victims wouldn't have resources to fight back was no longer valid when incidents could go viral within hours and attract legal representation from civil rights organizations. The Montgomery case changed the calculation, observed corporate attorney Lisa Parker. Companies can no longer assume that discrimination will be handled quietly through internal processes. They have to assume that every incident will be recorded, shared, and potentially become a federal case. 6 months after Flight 891, Terrence Montgomery testified before a congressional committee on transportation equity, recommending federal adoption of the Montgomery Protocol across all forms of public transportation. His quiet, factual testimony about the humiliation he'd endured and the changes it had inspired led to bipartisan support for the most comprehensive anti-discrimination transportation legislation in decades. Mr. Montgomery's experience, said Committee Chair Congresswoman Maria Rodriguez, demonstrates that discrimination in transportation affects everyone regardless of wealth or status. If a billionaire who owns an airline can be subjected to humiliation and bias, imagine what ordinary passengers experience every day. The legislation known as the Transportation Dignity Act passed both houses of Congress with overwhelming support and was signed into law 8 months after Candace Whitmore had first demanded that a black man in casual clothes prove he belonged in first class. Sometimes the most important changes begin with a single person's decision to endure injustice long enough to document it completely, ensuring that the truth becomes undeniable and the consequences become inevitable. 1 year later, Emma Montgomery stood at Gate B-17 at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, wearing a tiny aviation pin on her sweater and carrying a folder full of her science fair project photos. She was 9 years old now, taller, more confident, and completely unaware that the gate where she stood with her father had become a landmark in civil rights history. "Daddy, why do people keep taking pictures of this gate?" she asked, noticing the steady stream of travelers who paused to photograph the plaque that had been installed 6 months earlier. This gate commemorates Flight 891, where the Montgomery Protocol began ensuring dignity in travel for all passengers. Because sometimes important changes start in ordinary places, Terrence replied, watching Elite Airways ground crews prepare aircraft with visible diversity training certifications on their uniforms. This is where we learned that standing up for what's right can change how everyone is treated. They were traveling to Washington, D.C., where Emma would present her volcano project to the Smithsonian's Young Scientists program, an opportunity that had emerged from the media attention surrounding her father's discrimination case. What had begun as a disappointing missed science fair had evolved into national recognition for her creativity and scientific thinking. "Mr. Montgomery," a familiar voice called across the gate area. Michael Torres, now a sophomore at UCLA with a full scholarship from the Montgomery Foundation, approached with a camera crew from CNN, where he was completing a summer internship. Michael Terrence smiled, shaking hands with the young man whose live stream had changed everything. "How's the journalism program?" "Incredible, sir. And I wanted you to know that the documentary about Flight 891 premiered last night. It's already being used in civil rights courses at 12 universities." Emma looked up at the college student with curiosity. "Are you the one who took the video that helped my daddy?" "Yes, I am," Michael replied, kneeling down to her level. "Your daddy taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is document the truth, even when it's uncomfortable to watch. He taught me that quiet voices are stronger than loud voices," Emma said proudly. As they boarded the aircraft, Emma noticed immediately that something was different from airlines she remembered from before her father's incident. The flight attendants greeted every passenger individually, making eye contact using names when possible. Gate agents wore pins indicating completion of bias recognition training. Security personnel operated under protocols that required documentation and review for any passenger search. Most significantly, Seat 3A on every Elite Airways aircraft now carried a small placard reserved for Montgomery Protocol beneficiary. Dignity in Travel for All. Today's beneficiary was Marcus Williams, a 17-year-old from inner-city Detroit who was flying to MIT for an engineering scholarship interview. He sat in first class wearing his best clothes, still slightly overwhelmed by the experience, but carried forward by the knowledge that his presence was intended and welcome. "Mr. Williams," Terrence said, introducing himself as they settled into adjacent seats. "How are you feeling about your MIT interview?" "Nervous but excited, sir. I never imagined I'd get this opportunity. The Montgomery Foundation scholarship changed everything for my family." Emma leaned across the aisle. "My daddy says MIT is where smart people go to make things that help the world." "Are you going to make things that help the world?" Marcus grinned. "I hope so. I want to design infrastructure for communities that have been overlooked. Clean water systems, efficient energy grids, things that make life better for people who haven't had access to good technology." As the aircraft prepared for takeoff, Captain Rodriguez made an announcement that had become standard on Elite Airways flights. "Ladies and gentlemen, Elite Airways is proud to maintain the Montgomery Protocol, ensuring every passenger is treated with dignity and respect. We thank you for flying with an airline committed to equality and justice." Emma looked out the window as Atlanta disappeared below them, then turned to her father. "Daddy, do you think the mean lady from that day ever learned to be nicer?" Terrence considered the question carefully. Candace Whitmore had served 6 months in federal prison for civil rights violations and was now working for minimum wage at a non-profit organization focused on racial reconciliation. Her social media presence had been permanently destroyed. Her career in aviation consulting permanently ended. "I think she's learning, sweetheart. Sometimes people have to face consequences before they understand why their actions were wrong." "But you're not mad at her anymore." "No, Em. Being mad doesn't change anything. Working to make sure other people don't get treated the way she treated me, that changes everything." As Flight 891's anniversary approached, Terrence Montgomery found himself reflecting on how a 3-hour flight delay had transformed not just airline industry policies, but his understanding of how change actually happens in America. The incident that began with humiliation had become a case study in justice taught in law schools, business schools, and civil rights programs across the country. Mr. Montgomery asked Dr. Sarah Chen during a Harvard Business School lecture via video conference, "What would you tell other leaders about turning personal adversity into institutional change?" Terrence paused, thinking about Emma's volcano project and how small reactions could create powerful explosions when conditions were right. "I think the key insight is that individual injustice often reveals broader patterns that need to be addressed. When I was discriminated against on Flight 891, My choice was to focus on my personal comfort or to document the assumptions and biases that allow discrimination to flourish. But you had unique resources and power to respond. What about ordinary passengers who don't own airlines? That's exactly why the Montgomery Foundation was created, Terrence replied. No one should have to fight discrimination alone, and no one should accept bias because they lack resources to challenge it. The protocols we've implemented ensure that every passenger has access to immediate support and legal representation. His phone buzzed with a message from Emma, who was at school. Daddy, my teacher said to ask you, what's the most important thing kids should know about standing up for what's right? Terrence smiled, typing back. Tell your teacher that kids should know their voices matter even when they're quiet, especially when they're quiet. And they should never be afraid to document the truth even when adults around them are behaving badly. The truth was that Emma's question had become the central message of the Montgomery Foundation's youth education programs. Children who witnessed discrimination were being taught that their phones could be instruments of justice, that their willingness to record and report bias could protect other people from humiliation. We've trained over 40,000 young people in bystander intervention techniques, reported Foundation Director Maria Santos during a quarterly review meeting. They're learning to safely document discrimination, contact our hotline immediately, and provide witness testimony when needed. The program's success was measured not just in reported incidents, but in prevented ones. Airlines, hotels, restaurants, and retail establishments had dramatically reduced discriminatory behavior because they knew young customers were trained to recognize and document bias. The most interesting development, noted Dr. Patricia Williams from Georgetown, is how the threat of immediate documentation has changed institutional behavior proactively. Companies are training employees better because they know bad behavior will be recorded and shared within hours. Perhaps more importantly, the cultural conversation about discrimination had shifted. The old assumption that bias was subtle, hard to prove, or limited to extreme cases had been replaced by understanding that discrimination was often blatant, easily documented, and surprisingly common. Michael Torres's original live stream had been viewed over 10 million times and translated into 12 languages. It was used in high schools to teach about civil rights documentation in corporate training, to illustrate unconscious bias, and in law schools to demonstrate how digital evidence could accelerate justice. What Mr. Montgomery did, explained Professor Janet Davis in her journalism ethics course, was choose documentation over immediate relief. He endured humiliation to create evidence that would protect other people from similar treatment. That choice transformed individual suffering into collective progress. But the most powerful testimonial came from an unexpected source, Tyler Barnes, the teenage boy who had been the first Montgomery Protocol beneficiary to fly in Seat 3A. Now a freshman at Howard University studying aerospace engineering, he'd written an essay for the Montgomery Foundation newsletter Before Flight 891. I didn't believe people like me belonged in first class even when we could afford it. Mr. Montgomery's dignity under pressure didn't just change airline policies. It changed my understanding of what I deserve and what I can expect from the world. Sometimes one person's refusal to accept injustice quietly can reshape an entire generation's sense of possibility. The essay had been shared over 100,000 times because it captured something essential about how individual courage creates collective change. 2 years after the incident, Emma Montgomery was 10 years old and obsessed with aerospace engineering. Her bedroom walls were covered with pictures of aircraft, space shuttles, and rocket designs. But her most prized possession was a framed photo of her father sitting calmly in seat 28B while surrounded by discrimination and hostility. "Daddy," she said one evening as they worked on her latest science project, "Mrs. Peterson says, what happened on your airplane was like what Rosa Parks did on the bus. Is that true?" Terrence looked up from the volcano they were building together, this one bigger and more complex than her original design. "What do you think, sweetheart?" I think Rosa Parks said no to unfair rules, and you said no to unfair people. But you did it with your quiet voice, so it was stronger. The observation was more profound than Emma realized. The Montgomery Protocol had succeeded where many civil rights initiatives struggled because it focused on dignity rather than confrontation, documentation rather than accusation, and change rather than revenge. "Em, can I tell you something important?" Terrence said, putting down the model airplane he'd been assembling. "What happened on that flight taught me that the most powerful thing you can do when people treat you badly is to stay exactly who you are. Don't get loud, don't get mean. Just stay true to yourself and let truth speak. Is that why you didn't yell at the mean lady? That's exactly why. Yelling would have made me look like the problem. Staying calm made it clear that she was the problem." As they worked on Emma's project, Terrence's phone lit up with messages from passengers across the country who were flying without fear of discrimination for the first time in their lives. Hispanic families traveling to reunions without being questioned about their documentation. Black business travelers sitting in first class without being asked to prove they belonged there. Muslim passengers moving through security without being subjected to additional scrutiny based on their appearance. Each message was a reminder that personal pain could become collective progress when channeled through patience, documentation, and commitment to change. Daddy Emma said carefully mixing chemicals for her volcano's eruption. "When I grow up, I want to be a pilot for Elite Airways. Because of the planes. Because of the rules. I want to work for a company that protects people's dignity." Terrence watched his daughter's volcano explode in a perfect demonstration of controlled chemical reactions and realized that sometimes the most powerful eruptions began with the quietest preparations. Emma's generation would grow up in a world where discrimination on airplanes was not just illegal, but unthinkable. That night, as Emma slept with her pilot wings pinned to her pajamas, Terrence received one final message. "Mr. Montgomery, this is Candace Whitmore. I will spend the rest of my life trying to undo the harm I caused. Thank you for showing me what dignity looks like." He didn't respond. Some lessons had to be learned in silence, and some changes had to be lived rather than discussed. The quiet voice had become a roar that echoed across an entire industry, ensuring that no passenger would ever again be judged by their appearance rather than their ticket, and no child would grow up believing they didn't belong in spaces they could rightfully claim. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of the power of quiet dignity in the face of injustice, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about courage, justice, and the extraordinary things that happen when ordinary people refuse to accept discrimination. Your support helps us continue sharing these important messages about dignity, respect, and the changes we can all make together. Let us know in the comments if you've ever witnessed or experienced discrimination and how you responded. Together we can ensure that every person is treated with the dignity they deserve. Thank you for watching. And remember, sometimes the quiet voice is the strongest voice of all.